So let's start with an update on the situation in the Middle East. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned Gaza that the action has only just begun. It will use enormous force against Hamas in a complete siege by Israel. That comes after the attack from the proscribed terror group Hamas. At the weekend, Hamas attacked Israel, including a music festival about 3.7 miles east of Gaza. They fired thousands of rockets, and it's been reported about 900 people have died in Israel so far. Israel retaliated, killing nearly 700 people in airstrikes on Gaza. Just your first thoughts, Peter. I know it feels like a very concerning time for the world.
It's awful. I mean, what happened is just unforgivable. Innocent people, tortured, killed, abducted, raped. And it's only going to get worse. And I totally support Israel's right to defend themselves and take whatever action is necessary. The danger, of course, is this will expand to become a huge conflict. I'm old enough to remember the Six-Day War and the horrific things that happened. I mean, Iran seems to be behind all of this. What is Israel going to do about Iran?
Before I come to Gina, let's just have a look at the history of this and try to explain how we've got to where we've got to today, because there's a long and complicated history. Just come with me, if you can, for a moment. And let's go back to before World War II. So the land that would become Israel, just here on the map, was for years part of the Turkish-ruled Ottoman Empire, and then World War I, that broke up. And you can see here, this was known to Palestinians, to Arabs as Palestine, known as Israel by the Jews at the time, but there was no Israeli state at this point. And the British were in charge of sorting the borders out, which didn't become urgent until after World War II. Hitler's attempt to destroy the Jewish race made the world concentrate on finding a state for Israel. And this is what happened. Palestine was partitioned, and you have the Arab state in gold and the Israeli state, the new Israel, in blue. That's in the 1947-48. But as soon as that plan comes out, the very next day, there's an invasion by 5 Arab armies who don't accept Israel's right to be there. And Israel has to fight a war of independence. The Arab armies invade. They're repelled. And at the end of that war of independence in 1949, you then have the boundaries of effectively the new Israeli state is right there. But crucially, I'll point out, Gaza is Egyptian occupied and West Bank is Jordan occupied. Many Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, many exiled, some living in Israel. So that's where we are then. Peter's mentioned 1967. This was a huge change. Israel believed it was about to come under attack. That is disputed. But they then attacked into Egypt, the Sinai, the Gaza Strip, West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights, which are Syrian, effectively tripling the size of the territory they held. So now this is the map. And this is absolutely crucial. Look at that enormous territory, which is Egyptian there, that Israel had gone into, as they said, to preemptively prevent an Arab attack. So Egypt sue for peace. 82. Egypt say, we recognize this border, and they get their land back. They became the first Arab country to recognize the Jewish state. So at that point, that invasion of the Sinai is rescinded. The next thing that happens then is Jordan becomes the second Arab state to recognize this border here. But you still are left with this situation where you have many, many Palestinians in the West Bank, which is known as an occupied territory, occupied by Israel, and many, many in Gaza, which is what we're looking at now. And essentially, Gaza and the West Bank are under what is called Palestinian civilian control. But Hamas were elected there, and Hamas have done this. So what on earth happens next, Gina?
I echo everything Peter said. This is horrendous on every level, and looks like it's continued. I've heard one of the generals saying in an interview the other day that this could be 8 to 10 years. We're looking at a long war here, which is tragic for everyone on all sides. But incredibly, if you look behind what's going on, it appears, we don't know yet, as though this is being fueled and funded by Iran and the Ayatollahs, and there's an ideology here which is against the West and our way of life. So it's not just about being on the doorsteps of Israel. This is about what comes after. And I think that's where we've got to be. We have to act as one. the allies have to come together and really supercharge the Middle Eastern peace process. That's why I think Crowborough was right to sit, but Parliament needs to come back. We need to be talking to all of the other Arab states. And the other thing that I think that's coming out is that because the Arab states were talking with Israel, they were actually talking about joint projects, they were talking about infrastructure.
And Saudi Arabia was about to recognise it, yeah.
Yes, we saw that in recently. That somehow this has fueled the hatred of Iran even more and their anger and Hamas. And this is what's pushing back, because it seemed as though we were actually getting towards a place of peace.
Neil is in London. Neil, I mean, those maps tell the story, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible situation. And the Hamas violence of recent days is to be condemned. And it is appalling. But we have to view it in the light of the apartheid within the states. I mean, they've been suffering under that apartheid regime for decades now, and also the reaction from the Israelis is likely to be at least 10 times the deaths that you've seen from the Hamas side. So I think, but I mean, they've reserved the right pretty much to react disproportionately, which again is a war crime effectively. That.
Yeah, I hear what you say. I suppose Hamas will have calculated all this, right? So they'll know that what they've done has stung Israel. There will be a massive retaliation, which will make people around the world, to some degree, criticize Israel. That's part of Hamas's plan. So Hamas must be responsible for this retaliation, surely.
Well, there is a retaliation, but then again, they've been under apartheid for decades. And it's not tolerated elsewhere. And Human Rights Watch and many international groups have labelled it as apartheid, and it seems to satisfy the three criteria of that.
Obviously, so, it's arguable from Israel's point of view, but I mean, yeah, okay, you've said it.
I mean, should the world tolerate 10 or 20 times the death count, and is that disproportionate? And should it be condemned again as collective punishment?
Yeah, the answer is I just don't know where this is going, and we're all concerned, obviously, about what happens next. Thank you, Neil. Osman in Manchester, what do you make of it?
Really, Jeremy, I wanted to ask is, you come on at the start of the show and you said that the Israelis are retaliating against the Palestinians, but you never seem to mention what's been going on for the last 70 plus years to the Palestinians.
I just did. I just did a whole thing on it.
Yeah, but since yesterday you've been going on about this and you call Hamas a terrorist group. Is the IDF and the Zionists not a terrorist group then? You never ever seem to mention that.
Part of the problem here, genuinely, is that this thing at the weekend jumped out of the narrative that you're describing that's been running for a long time. And this becomes the absolute all-dominating story. But you're right, we shouldn't take all the context away. Do accept that.
So why is it never publicised on TV or shown on your show or any news outlet when the IDF and the Zionists are killing babies, shooting them in the head, killing innocent women on roadsides? Why is that never shown on
I do think, do you know what? I do think there's an awful lot of coverage of that. I do think that the situation...
There's no coverage of that. There's never no
we describe them as occupied territories. The situation the Palestinians live in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank is covered. I've been there. I've seen the settlements. I know how contested they are. I mean, everyone knows the situation here, Osman, honestly.
Yeah, everyone knows the situation, but no one seems to talk about it. But all they ever talk about is Israel is they've had 900 people killed, this has happened, that's happened. But no one ever seems to mention whatever happens to the Palestinians.
I hear you. Well, Peter, let's go to Peter on this, because part of this is because of the shock at what happened on the weekend, right?
I just fundamentally do disagree with Osman. I mean, the fact that this is a terrorist attack where men, women and children have either been killed or tortured or abducted, or in one case we know of, a young woman was raped, tortured, killed, and then paraded naked through Gaza. If you cannot call that out, Osman, I don't really want to talk to you.
Osman?
Then, on the other hand, when this happens to the
There's
Palestinian
no, on the other
people.
hand, condemn it.
Of course there is. Of course there is. It's been happening for the last 70 plus years to the Palestinian people, but no one's ever called it out as a terrorist attack like you've just called it out as a terrorist attack when an Israeli woman, it happens to an Israeli woman, but when it happens to a Palestinian
I think he's referring to a
nothing's
young.
ever covered.
I think he's referring actually to a young Jewish woman from Germany, as it happens, who was at a peace concert.
Yes.
Osman, thank you. Gordon in Glasgow, hi.
Hi, I would point out the same fact again, that the state of Israel was formed by terrorism. The Israelis at that time in 1947, they blew up the St David Hotel and hung British soldiers and booby-trapped their bodies.
Yeah. I know that. We know the history, the Stern Gang and all that stuff.
But then
they
I
see
think
them.
it's double standards when they turn around and say that Israel are calling the Palestinians terrorists when we all know they are terrorists.
I don't know, Gina. You respond, because this just takes us into this thicket of history, doesn't it?
It is, and I think what Gordon is saying is not to be black and white on this. And I think this, if you look at the EU made a U-turn about sanctions and not sending aid to or stopping any aid to Palestine. I go back to the fact that I think it's important that we remember that Hamas and the people of Palestine and Gaza aren't the same. We shouldn't conflate the two. And Israel and the allies, we all have a responsibility to the civilians in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian civilians and children that are innocent and are caught up in this. But this was a terrorist attack, and there had to be, it had to be called out, and they should be held accountable. Innocent Israelis were killed and murdered in cold blood. 200, 300 young people at a concert being taken. Families, we now know, of 3 generations that have been taken. Yeah. Babies as young as 9 months, or actually one, I think, as young as 10 days.
Well, a grandmother with dementia.
Grandmother. It is without her medication. This is so sensitive. It's not going to go away, but we also can't knee-jerk react either.